For you tonight, all of the candidates joining us are hoping to be the Republican nominee in the race for the 3rd Congressional District. And we continue our debate with individual questions that are being posed to each of the candidates. We begin with Robert Kramer. Mr. Kramer, it was a year ago the Iowa Senate rejected your nomination to the Iowa Board of Regents. Lawmakers said it was because of your social conservative views. You responded by saying, quote, "They seem to be more concerned about your personal beliefs than your work with education." So if you get this nomination, how do you win over the moderate, independent, and maybe undecided voters?
Yeah, Governor Branstad nominated me last year to be on the Board of Regents. Yeah, it's the board that oversees the universities because of all the construction they were going to do. And I was surprised when the Democrats, all they want to talk about was my views on marriage and on life. And I think when Iowans look at that, they take away from that, one, I wasn't going to back down from my convictions for a political office. I think, two, they saw that I could be a reasonable guy in the room even when the other side was being unreasonable. So when the vote came and 100% of the Republicans supported me, and some of the Democrats did, but some of them just couldn't get past those issues, I think it sent the right signal to Iowans, and I think Iowans looking back would say, I don't think that was fair, I think that was a litmus test, and we should be putting people into offices based on qualifications, not on their personal convictions.
All right, Robert Kramer, thank you. Monty Shaw, you recently told the Des Moines Register that the climate is changing, but I don't think there's a role for the federal government to deal with it. As the executive director of Iowa Renewable Fuels Association, tell the voters tonight your opinion on pollution. We touched a little bit on this earlier, as well as the EPA, and what the federal government's role should be when it comes to environmental problems.
Well, you know, there is a role for federal government in the environment, but it's not what the EPA is doing. That's an agency that, quite frankly, is out of control, out of touch. We need to scrap it and put something else in its place. But you know what? Water crosses state lines. Air crosses state lines. And so I prefer market-based approaches where we can have consumers going out there choosing cleaner, renewable fuels, for example, like you mentioned, and having an impact on that. When the government gets involved, they tend to screw things up. You know, right now their big thing is we got to stop climate change. But the cap and trade bill they put out would have killed our economy and actually increased global warming gases if that was something you were concerned about. That's just silly. We've seen the same thing when I was in school and we were all worrying about the next coming ice age, and there were plans to shoot rockets into space to spread debris that would actually warm the climate. Aren't we glad they didn't get that one through? We need to find common sense solutions, bring people together, and make real decisions to protect the environment without compromising on our economy and getting the jobs that we need in this country.
Monty Shaw, thank you very much. David Young, you've been, as you mentioned, on the staff of Senator Grassley, also worked in a variety of roles behind the scenes, you might say. So what's the difference between that and a career politician? Or should we say David Young is a career bureaucrat?
Well, I appreciate the question. And first of all, I'm the only one here who's not run for a party or public office before. And I'm proud of my service working for the taxpayer, battling the liberal bureaucracy every day. You know, being beside Senator Grassley, working for Iowa, you learn some things. You learn how to be creative when the government's shut down and there's gridlock. You learn how to do oversight. You learn how to be a whistleblower or protect whistleblowers. You know, I can name many times when I would get phone calls from folks within the bureaucracy or just taxpayers wanting protection because they see fraud and abuse. And so we found creative ways to help the taxpayer. As well, I know who my boss is, ultimately. It's the people of the 3rd District. Not Mitch McConnell or John Boehner. And as a person of faith, I've learned that you don't have to sell your soul to get things done in Washington, D.C.
Mr. Young, thank you. Brad Zahn, you recently got a lot of attention locally when you revealed that you took a gun to the State House for protection. We talked earlier about gun control. Why did you feel the need to pack heat at the State House? And where else have you taken a gun with you? Do you have one with you tonight?
I do not. I will tell you that it's really nobody's business. I should have answered that way when the Des Moines Register editorial board asked me about that. We were talking about where I was at on the Second Amendment, and then it led into, do you have a permit to carry, which I did lawfully, took the classes, went to a shooting range and practiced, and then, of course, they followed up about going to the state capitol. Why do I do that? Because of what happened in Arizona. If you're a public servant, you've got a target on your back, and I've had many threats from individuals that I have worked with the State Patrol on, and I am going to defend myself. I think it's my right to do that. I will fight for our Second Amendment rights if I'm elected to Washington, D.C., and I just believe that as a law-abiding citizen should have the right to do that. In regards to, You know, going into the Capitol, I was always told that that was that lawmakers could bring a firearm in there. There's many exits, because all the law-abiding people go through the metal detector, but there's many exits. There's no security.
Thank you very much, Senator Zahn. Joe Grandinet, you say marriage should be between a man and a woman. So what role should the federal government have in that? Should there be some sort of a law? Should DOMA be reenacted? Some sort of a constitutional amendment? What do you say to the thousands of same-sex Iowa couples who have been legally married for the past 5 years? And why is this an issue in a congressional campaign?
Well, first of all, the state of Iowa, we should have put it to the vote of the taxpayers to see if the Iowans wanted a marriage between 2 men and 2 women. So and to have a judge decide that was wrong. And I believe marriage is between a man and a woman. It's been like that from the beginning of time. And now that we have judges and people in office that have decided that marriages can be between 2 men and 2 women, well, that's a fallacy. I am Catholic. It's a sacrament. And ladies and gentlemen, everybody knows that marriage is 1 man and 1 woman, and that's the way it should be. And people throughout the country, in California, they voted it in, and then they voted it out. In Iowa, give us a chance, and we'll vote it out, because the fact is, a lot of people in this state don't want it. That's what I've heard. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Grandinet. Mr. Schultz, if you represent Iowa in the House of Representatives, you're going to be making decisions involving trillions of dollars in spending. You recently spent $250,000 investigating voter fraud that resulted in charges against only 27 people. Can you say that was an efficient use of $250,000?
Absolutely. Money well spent. You know, we spent 6.5 cents a voter to protect your vote. We found 117 people who had canceled out the legitimate votes of Iowa voters. And we're referring over 100 people to local law enforcement as a result of these investigations and others where they have the same first name, last 4 digits of their social security number, and birth date. If I'm not going to stand up for the integrity of the elections, who is? And, you know, I find it funny that Democrats want to attack me. They attack me all the time. They didn't attack Chet Culver when he spent over $100,000 of the same money throwing a party.
Well, thank you very much. We're going to cycle ahead now. Monty Shaw, you say welfare has gone from a safety net to a feather bed. So are you referring to all welfare, such as aid to dependent children, school lunches? What type of welfare do you think has become a, quote, feather bed?
I'm talking about the fact that we've made it easier in this, let's put it this way, we've made it more comfortable in this country in some cases not to work than to work. We all know there are people. I have a dear friend of mine that lost a job, went on unemployment for a little bit, worked his tail off, found a new job, and got going again. We all know there are families out there that need some help, children that need some help. No one's talking about that. What we're talking about is, I recently heard somewhere, I have not been able to independently verify this yet, that if you added up all the federal programs from the Obama phones to everything else, you would have to make the equivalent of $27 an hour to actually replace all of that and go back to work. I've been in a small town in Lenox, Iowa, that has a great manufacturing base for a small town. And they recently had someone at one of the businesses down there get hurt with a foot, went out. When they wanted to bring him back in, instead of him coming back, he said, you know, I've been hanging out with some of my buddies and they showed me all these things I can get, and even though you're giving me benefits and $20 an hour, I'd rather just stay home and not work. When you hear stories like that, you know something's broken and we've got to fix it.
Thank you, Monty Shaw. David Young, in your first television ad, you said, quote, President Obama ripped apart our health care system, shredded our economy, and crumbled our national security. We've already talked a little bit about health care, but I'd like to have you elaborate for the voters tonight on how the president shredded the economy and crumbled national security.
Well, Obamacare crumbled basically shredded our economy. I mean, it has made this economy stagnant. Employers are having to let some employees go or move them to full-time to part-time work, letting go of their health care. And it's hampering the decision-making by employers as well. He's not providing any certainty in the tax code. I've met a lot of entrepreneurs, small business owners, larger businesses who want to play in this economy, but there's no leadership there on tax simplification reform to make it certain and permanent. And with our national security, we see that he's not actively engaging in capturing Edward Snowden, who has leaked so many of our national security secrets. What is he doing about that? We need a president who takes that very seriously, because I know Americans do.
David Young, thank you very much. Brad Zahn, You recently voted in the majority in the Iowa Senate to approve the limited use of medical marijuana or cannabis oil. Some say doing this opens a whole new can of worms. Where do you stand on any broadening of the scope of certain banned substances for medical or even recreational purposes?
Well, first of all, I did a lot of research on this issue, talked to a lot of parents, talked to neurologists, looked at a lot of studies that have been done on that. With that said, I will not and never will support any kind of recreational use of marijuana. But I had so many parents come to me that have shown me proof, and there was actually a couple parents that had actually used what we passed in the Iowa Senate, which was an oil that you could apply on the skin of your child that has epilepsy that reduced the seizures from about 80 seizures a day down to 3 or 4 a day. And I thought that, I knew it was controversial, and this is another example of not making decisions based on re-election. I was told by many people that this could possibly cause me an election, but I did the right thing, because who is it for me to tell a parent if they could reduce the seizures to their child to vote against that because of re-election?
All right, Redzon, thank you very much. Joe Grandinette, you're a physical education teacher here in Des Moines. What should the role of the federal government be when it comes to schools, from the district level to the federal level? Should the Department of Education be totally eliminated, changed, or altered in some way? And should the federal government be the one to set minimum standards?
Well, the federal government decided to get an education, but they gave it with some strings attached. You can take all this money, and then you can have this new system. And, of course, they blew up the whole system, and now the states have no direction. The federal government, it's better to have it at the state level. It's better to have it at the state level. We know what's best for our educators in the state. Des Moines Public Schools are urban setting. The rest of the communities around us are rural settings. We have different things that go on in our community that need to be addressed. The federally mandated programs help the poor students in our classes, of course with subsidized lunches and different things. And so there is a role for the federal government, but it shouldn't be the role of the whole educational system. Leave it to the states to make those decisions.
Thank you, Joe Grandinette. Matt Schultz, should the taxpayers of Iowa be reimbursed $80,000, which is the amount of salary that Jim Gibbons collected after you decided to eliminate his job but still kept him on the payroll?
Look, I've been very upfront about this situation. We followed the advice of the Department of Administrative Services. I notified Mr. Gibbons in May that I wanted to combine 2 deputy positions, something that hadn't been done before. And I was trying to save the state money. And I did. We saved the state more than $200,000 in permanent savings. Over 5 years, that'll be more than $1 million. No other statewide elected official is returning money to the general fund, as far as I know. This is something that doesn't happen. I've held the line, I've controlled spending, and I followed the advice of the Department of Administrative Services. And I won't apologize to Iowans for saving money.
And finally, Mr. Kramer, you have been a very active conservative leader in the social arena. Former chairman of the board of Family Leader, for example, yet at your announcement of your candidacy, you indicated that you didn't plan to introduce any legislation on social issues. So are social issues not important anymore? Or if you could just tell the voters why it is many of the issues that you work for won't be the issues that you decide to act upon legislatively in Congress.
Yeah, I was indicating that it seems like we've been on defense when it comes to social issues. And I felt like this election is about jobs, jobs, and jobs. So I think if we can get this economy turned around and do that by balancing the budget, by eliminating some of these crazy regulations and removing that fog of uncertainty, and then allowing the private sector to really take off, that'll help everybody. Everybody looking for a job, the person looking for a better job, and the person with the stagnant wages. The social issues are very important, and I think people know my stand on those, and they know, even from looking at that Board of Regents ordeal, that I won't back down on those.
All right. Gentlemen, thank you very much for the answers to that series of questions. We have all said at one point or another, I believe you have rather, that Washington is broken. So we're going to play part of a story that ran on KCCI back in 2011. It's a town hall meeting that Congressman Tom Latham hosted. Take a look.
There were a lot of questions and some raised voices at Congressman Tom Latham's town hall meeting in Waukee. A lot of it focused on spending. Some want Republicans to stop compromising and bring the government to a halt if that's what it takes.
You got to stop the daggone spending, and the only way you're going to get people to listen, everybody says, how do we tell the people, is you shut the daggone thing down. You Republicans give in too doggone easily. You think you're whipped, and you're not.
But a soldier just returned from Afghanistan reminded the congressman of what's at stake when a government shutdown looms.
How are we going to pay our families? How are we going to get money for our families? And I don't know, I'm sure it was a lot of political maneuvering at the D.C. level, I'm guessing, but the troops on the ground, they were shaken, okay?
Latham says nothing is as simple as it seems.
The fact of the matter is we have to govern in the political situation that there is today.
I understand why they're very mad at Washington because I feel the same way.
Well, there you have it. That was in 2011, gentlemen. We put 3 candidates' names into a hat and asked them to respond. They were Mr. Young, Mr. Shaw, and Mr. Zahn. So candidates talk about Congressman Latham's opinion. What's broken in Washington now? And would you be willing to compromise, to reach across the aisle to get things done? We'll begin with Mr. Young.
Well, Washington is broken. And first of all, I appreciate the service of Congressman Latham. I will miss him. I wish that he was not retiring. But Washington is broken. And I've seen the tools that can be used to try to help fix it. I know what can be done and how to get it done. But some of the biggest problems out there are not going to be solved, unfortunately, on a partisan level. You got to have a bipartisan approach to this, whether it's tax reform and tax simplification, Social Security, Medicare. And I think that you can be an honest broker and come to the table and stand your ground, and you don't necessarily have to compromise your conservative principles. I believe in cooperation. And you need both sides of the party to come together. I will present myself as an honest broker. I've got my issues with the government. I don't want to blow it up, but I do want to take a stick and whack it.
Mr. Young, thank you very much. Mr. Shaw, you're next. Your take on what happened back in 2011 and what it means today.
Well, when you look at how out of control the spending and the debt is and the regulations and what that means for my 2 kids' future and lack of economic hope if we stayed on this path, I totally understand why some people want to take that fist and pound the table. But if we're going to solve those problems, we're also going to have someone in D.C. who will sit down at that same table, roll up their sleeves, and go to work. With 21 years advocating for conservative candidates and causes, I've learned how to negotiate the finer details, but also when to draw that line in the sand and say no more. And I think it's that type of pragmatism, thoughtful approach that can work across party lines. I did it when I was on ag policy and energy policy in my day job as executive director of the Iowa Renewable Fuels Association, but I've also done it in a party role when I was a volunteer for the Republican Party of Iowa and we had to bring the party together and move the party forward. I did it there. So I have a track record of finding ways to bring people together and getting real solutions done. We can't just vote no while the economy and our country goes over the cliff. We need real people to come together and turn this so we can have a better future for our kids. That's why I'm running.
All right, Mike Shaw, thank you very much. Brad Zahn?
Well, I think what was demonstrated on that tape that we just saw is people are upset because Washington, D.C. politicians are not listening. My promise to you all is that I will go out there to do a job, to make tough decisions. You know, I co-sponsored a bill several years ago, the first year I got down there, to have term limits. There's too many people out there that are making careers out of this and worrying about their reelection. We have got to stop this irresponsibility that's going on in Washington, D.C. I have 5 kids, and I am so concerned about their future, as well as all the younger people. But they keep kicking the can down the road and putting off these bad decisions. We have got to stop this out of control, out of touch Washington, D.C., and send people that will make decisions based on what's right, rather than reelection.
Brad Zahn, thank you. Thank all 3 of you for those answers. Mr. Grandinet, Mr. Kramer, and Mr. Schultz, your names were drawn next for this particular question. Your potential opponent is Stacey Apple. She is hoping to be the first woman from Iowa to serve in the U.S. House of Representatives. On her website, she says if elected, she will, quote, protect reproductive freedom so that women can make their own health care decisions and fight to ensure that women's health care gains are not rolled back. She goes on to say that she is steadfast in her support of a woman's right to privacy, access, and access to preventative care. We go in the order that the names were drawn. Mr. Grandinet, could I have your reaction to Stacey Apple's statement?
Stacey Apple is the most liberal woman on this side of the earth. And she needs to be voted out in November. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm pro-life from conception to death. Stacey Apple has a different opinion. She's wrong. We're not going to kill babies just because she thinks it's a woman's right to kill babies. How would she like to have been one of those people that were killed by their mother? She's wrong. She's absolutely wrong. And I will stand up and I will fight for the unborn child. I will fight for the old folks that they throw away in nursing homes, because I'm for right to life from conception to death. Thank you.
Mr. Bernadette. I believe the order next calls for Mr. Kramer's response.
Okay. I'm unashamedly pro-life, and I believe we do have to protect life from conception to natural death. And I'm proud to be part of organizations that in the past maybe the pro-life community was maybe rightly or wrongly accused of not taking care of the mother, but just being worried about the baby. But boy, now by supporting things like Ruth Harbor, which is a ministry that helps ladies who have chosen to keep their baby but don't have a place to live. Inner Visions is a great organization here in Des Moines that's counseling young ladies and then meeting their needs to help them keep that baby, and whether they choose to keep the baby themselves or put it up for adoption. So the pro-life movement has really stepped up. My wife and I have also stepped up to help children in need, and that's through foster care. And there's certainly no shortage of that here in Polk County or across the country. So we need people to really value life, no matter when it is and where it is, and all the way from conception to natural death.
All right, and Mr. Schultz.
You know, this is actually a very important subject. I'm pro-life. My wife and I have 5 children, and we felt the pain of losing a child in stillbirth. I believe that life begins at conception and ends at natural death. And as a city councilman in Council Bluffs, I've actually fought for life. You know, we can remember Dr. Carhart in Omaha, in Nebraska. He was trying to build a late-term abortion clinic in Council Bluffs. Well, I banded together with my fellow council members, and he was looking at a piece of city property. Well, we put a deed restriction on that property saying no abortions could be performed there. And we successfully kept Dr. Carhart out of Council Bluffs. I'm pro-life, and I'm going to fight for life.
Matt Schultz, thank you very much. We've got about 4 minutes left in the show, and I'd like to ask a variety of questions and ask specific people to answer them. So let me begin with something that we haven't really talked about. The federal excise tax on gasoline hasn't been raised since the Clinton administration. Roads and bridges and highways are deteriorating faster than they can be replaced. Is it time to raise the federal gas tax again, Mr. Kramer?
That's a good question. And I'm proud to be part of an industry that builds roads and bridges, which is the infrastructure that we gets all of our produce to market and gets us all safely to our jobs. But the federal government has too much of our money. So if we're going to raise any kind of tax at the federal level, we need to offset it with some sort of a tax reduction, because I made a pledge that I wouldn't raise any taxes unless it had an offset.
All right. So the answer to your question is?
We can raise the gas tax as long as we lower a different one.
All right. Mr. Young, same question.
No.
Not at all?
Nope.
Flat no. Brad's on.
No.
Very good. Monty Shaw, you served on the GOP Central Committee. Is the Tea Party movement losing influence, too much influence, misdirected? Tell me about the Tea Party.
Well, you know, I think anyone who wants to say I'm taxed enough already is going to find a friend in me. But what you're also going to find is someone who's not strident, someone who will stand strong for their conservative principles, but do it in a thoughtful and respectful way. Someone who's proud to have someone like a John King, who's Steve King's brother, endorse me, but also Dr. Greg Gansky, who represented this area for 8 years in Congress. If we're going to win the swing district in November, we've got to unite all the parts of the Republican Party and go out and get a big chunk of the independent vote. I think if you have a thoughtful approach to that, you can accomplish that. You can bring people together. You can have solutions. You can actually get things done once you're elected, and you don't have to violate your principles to do it.
I want to try and get everybody in here. Brad's on. 11 million illegal immigrants roughly in this country. Should they have a path to citizenship, or should their path lead back home?
We need to look at the process, because I guarantee the process is different than our ancestors went through. I can tell you that I've been told by farmers and people that are trying to bring people in on a green card that it is just unbelievable. There's about that much paperwork to become a citizen, and we need to make sure we look at the process, but it does not include amnesty.
Speaking of paperwork, tax reform, Matt Schultz, a popular tax quote the past couple of years. The tax code is twice as long as the Bible with none of the good news. So give me some good news about what you do about tax reform.
Well, look, I loved it when Rick Perry stood up and said we need to be able to turn our taxes in on a postcard. 76,000 pages of regulation. The IRS doesn't even know what's in the tax code. We need a simpler, fairer, flatter tax. But we can't really talk about it until we actually pass a balanced budget amendment, where we get the spending under control. Then we can really talk about how we fix our tax problems in this country.
Joe Grandinet, what's the first thing the government could do to improve the business situation for small businesses?
Get the regulations out of the way. We have federal regulations, we have state regulations, we have county, we have city. It's crippling the small businesses. And in turn, we have the government now, they want to raise the minimum wage. Get the government out of all the small businesses so that they can make money and put people back to work.
All right, question for everybody, and I'll start at this end right here. Monty Shaw, who does not pay enough taxes?
Well, I think, that's an interesting question. Collectively, we pay a lot of taxes. I don't know what you pay, and I hope you don't have the ability to find out what I pay, but I can tell you it's quite a bit. The problem is not too little taxes going into Washington, D.C. It's too much wasteful spending. We can do things more efficiently. We can get the federal government out of things, bring it back to the states. Too much spending, not too little taxes.
All right, real quickly.
We hear a lot of stories about multimillionaires and billionaires who seemingly find all the tax loopholes and don't end up paying a penny in taxes. We need to overhaul this tax system, make it simpler and fair. Everybody needs to have skin in the game, and we need to make it permanent and certain so businesses and folks can create jobs and expand opportunity in this economy.
Brad Zahn, who does not pay enough
Well,
taxes?
I've been told Warren Buffett pays less taxes than his own secretaries, and there's the problem. The system that we have in place is wrong, and we need to change it.
All right. Joe Grandinet.
The people that have a lot of money, they don't pay enough taxes. The small little guy, we pay more than our fair share. The tax codes are set up so that if you're a big corporation, you have more profits at the end by having less things that you can control. So in turn, the corporation should be paying more.
Thank you, Joe. Matt Schultz, just a few seconds left, but I want to get everybody in.
Well, I've told you, we need a simpler, flatter tax system. That's what I support. And in order to do that, we need a balanced budget amendment. And that's what I'm going to go fight for.
Robert Kramer?
Yeah, I don't know anybody that needs to pay any more. We need to cut spending and balance the budget.
All right, gentlemen, thank you very much. I had one other question here. That was going to be who's going to win the NBA championship, but we're out of time, so I apologize. Our time is up. To all of the candidates who are with us tonight, Robert Kramer, Joe Grandinet, Matt Schultz, Monty Shaw, David Young, Brad Zahn, thank you all for your time tonight. Thank your staffs for their preparation assistance with our producers. Our thanks also to you, especially for watching. Remember, primary election is January 3rd. Also remember, we'll be back here in 2 nights, Thursday at 6:30, when the 5 candidates for the Republican nomination for the U.S. Senate will be here for another debate. Again, that's Thursday at 6:30 on KCCI and KCCI.